So I started implementing those tools, and I still remember the first time I asked one of the athletes to pick up the sandbag off the ground, and he was wrestling with it for what seemed to be several minutes, and he's like, this is so awkward, this is tough. And what he was trying to say to me was, is there a better way? Can I go use the barbell? And I said, that's exactly why we're using it, because when it's tough, that's when you have to make it happen. That's when you have to be strong and not give up. And I learned that those odd objects got the kids tough. It also added in those early days a very unique element where they felt special.
That was strength coach Zach Even Esh speaking on the uniqueness and the utilization of tools such as sandbags and other odd objects in a strength and conditioning program. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to episode 115 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Today we have back on the show strength coach, educator, and entrepreneur Zach Even Esh. We had Zach for episode 100, which was a really cool episode speaking on really the epidemic of the lack of physical preparation and the ability to play in our youth. And we also talked a little bit about early specialization. Zach was a huge element on that show. He has so much in the trenches experience working with high schoolers, middle schoolers, as well as collegiate and other athletes. But Zach's true passion is really crafting young athletes, introducing them to strength, as well as you heard in the teaser, using odd objects to really give them a unique and effective strength and conditioning experience. So Zach's background, if you didn't hear it the first time as well, he's the founder of the Underground Strength Gym and has also created the Underground Strength Coach certification. He's coached over 1,000 athletes from the youth level to collegiate level. Zach is a true leading figure in the strength and conditioning industry and also with those strength entrepreneurs out there. One of the things that's always stood out to me about Zach and also resonated with me in life is using the power of what you have. So when you do not have a choice, when it's just, I have these three things, I am going to train with these three things. On podcast episode 96, Dan John also talked about training high-achieving high school throwers with minimal facilities and coaching a girl shot putter with a rock. I've had Adarian Barr coach me with nothing but a 25-pound plate in a grass field and teach me incredible things about how I was using my arms and sprinting and jumping. And it's just, I really enjoy talking to coaches who have done so much, starting with so little and crafting that into a training program. You look at the old school strongmen who had to figure out ways to train with very little and got amazing results. And it's that creativity that I just so much love. And so I'm excited to talk to Zach today. He's just a great strength coach and person, has done amazing things with the young athletes that he has worked with. So today on the show, we are going to cover Zach's story and mission as a coach, how he got started and how he created and defined his mission, As you heard in the teaser, we're going to talk about using alternative means for training athletes. We're going to talk about the importance of partnerships and environment in enhancing creativity and work outputs, as well as continuing on in talking about continuing off episode 100. And Zach will speak more on trends in youth performance in terms of kids' physical readiness. So excited to get to you guys this show. Let's get on to it. Zach, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it, my man. I know it's early on that West Coast.
Yeah, a little bit. It's an early one, but it actually sets my day up really well. It forces me to get my engine running a little bit sooner, and I always love doing these. And last time you were on episode 100, it was an amazing one, and really a lot of things that just really changed my mind and things going on in the sports industry, or performance industry. So I'm happy to have you back.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. That was a great podcast with Jeremy.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I know last time we had three people on. I'd like to kind of hone in on you particularly this time. And I know you've shared it a million times, or at least a lot that I've heard. And I love hearing it every time, but just a little bit about, and I think we'll probably get into it too. We were talking about it before, but like when we're a sports performance coach, a strength coach, we have a mission, right? Like, and how did your mission start, and why is it what it is now?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the different missions of different coaches. So last time we had Jeremy, we were with George. So George spending most of his time in pro athletes, NFL, special forces, and then Jeremy with the youth and me with like the level above him. It was like an interesting dichotomy. So what really, I guess I got lucky in the way where some people, they have passion, and that was kind of always, I was always very passionate when it came to training, even as a kid. And other people are not so much into the passionate side of things. They're more into the intricate details of things. So maybe the science behind the training. And I look back to when I was training with guys when I was in my younger years of high school. I was training with some of the older high school guys, and it was a group of 2 to 3 to sometimes 5. But they always wanted me to be the guy that organized the workout, that said when we're training together, that said this is what we're doing. And then from that, I had like my friends in school that were on the other sport teams, whether it was football, basketball, baseball. They would say, "Hey, Zach, write me a workout, for chest. This is like early 90s, and these are like baseball guys." So during class, every textbook had like a bodybuilding magazine in the middle of it, and I had a notebook where I was just writing. Those were like early days of my program design stuff. And in my high school years, I remember thinking to myself, I want to own a gym. This is what I want to do. And strength and conditioning was not a thing that I knew of, or really anybody knew of. There was personal trainers in the gyms, and I didn't, there wasn't too much opportunity when I was starting to look at college. You either were going to be a physical therapist, and anybody who was doing PT, I never saw them working with athletes because the injuries of the 90s were not what they were of the 2000s. I look at high school, and the only person that ever had a surgery was my brother. He had a meniscus repaired. There was no baseball guys having Tommy John surgery, shoulder surgery. I saw the quarterback and the pitcher benching heavy with the football team. Like it was just the normal thing. So when I went into college, there was health and phys ed, and it was called adult fitness, which was essentially you would go into like a cardiac rehab and exercise. It wasn't even exercise science back then. So long story short, I get through college. I was bodybuilding when I was in college. I get my teaching degree. I begin teaching, and I'm training very hard all through these, years. But the thing that set me off was I tore my ACL my 5th year teaching, and I tore it while training in jiu-jitsu, but doing stand-up work. So I was competing in jiu-jitsu. I was doing Muay Thai. I was coaching wrestling, and I believe it may have been, I had a lot of injuries that year. I think I had I tore my rotator cuff. Then there was the ACL. I didn't need surgery on the shoulder, but long story short, it just hit me where I was like, man, how am I training so hard for all these years? I started, working out at age 12, lifting weights at age 13. So half my life I'm training, yet I'm getting injuries, and I realize I'm just training the wrong way for wrestling, for combat sports. So after that ACL injury, I'm a fifth year teacher. I start researching how the Russian wrestlers train because I knew that the Russians at the time were the best wrestlers, and the internet was super new, very raw. So I can't even remember if I was coming across stuff on the internet. It was like, very unique old school forums on Yahoo and these other search engines. And I was able to pick up some information. And I think Elite FTS and Westside Barbell were like the two websites that were alive. And by searching like Russian training methods, it kept bringing me back to Elite FTS, which had all of the original Westside Barbell articles. I printed them all out. And I believe it was Tommy Myslinski. They call him Milo. He's the strength coach for Jacksonville Jaguars. I believe he did his master's thesis on it was called like the Russian conjugate sequence system. So I kind of poured into all the right stuff. And lucky for me, back then, there wasn't a million websites to get confused about. So I started learning where my training was flawed, all of those bodybuilding machines and isolation movements, and looking at how the Russians train their athletes. So once that winter passed, I knew that I was going to just start training differently, and I was going to start training out of my garage. So I started piecing together equipment from newspaper classified ads. I went into some real like shady places in New Jersey to buy stuff from, it seemed, what they were like personal training studios that shut down. So I got some dumbbells. I got a flat utility bench, a dip bar. I purchased like a set of upright squat stands, and I trained in my own garage, in my parents' garage, until it just got so freezing cold in there that I couldn't train in there anymore. But when I trained out of my garage, I put on like a different kind of size and muscle compared to when I trained out of these normal gyms where I was on a lot of machines. So I had a barbell, I had a pair of dumbbells, 50s and 100s. That's it. I had the dip bar. I had the flat utility bench, which I would put a toolbox under to do inclines on. So my training was kind of like this minimalist training, and I had read a lot about the golden era bodybuilders, and it brought me back to that time. They trained very basic. They didn't have too many machines, although they did have machines in those late 60s, early 70s. I did not, but I was training the way like Dave Draper would train, like a lot of supersets and just pushing the pace. And I put on a lot of size and strength. So with my research of what the Russians were doing, and then this kind of golden era bodybuilding stuff, when the spring and late spring, early summer came around, I spoke to a couple of the parents of the wrestlers I coached and told them I'd be training kids out of my parents' garage. So I was training a couple of wrestlers and a basketball player in the neighborhood. And that basketball player was entering his senior year. And I remember by the end of the summer, he was dunking. And this is a time like we didn't really do much jump work. We did a little bit of jump work. I didn't really have much knowledge about it, but I would take him to the field behind his area of the neighborhood, and it was like the water towers were up there, so there was like a pretty deep hill to sprint. And I remember having him bounding across the field, like doing the bounding, doing squat jumps out in front of my driveway. And then other than that, it was basic strength work. He would deadlift, he would clean and press, but we would do stuff out of my parents' backyard. We had stones. I would put a towel around the tree and do towel pull-ups. So he was dunking by the end of that summer, and I realized, okay, this stuff works, because he couldn't dunk. 2 months later, not even 2 months, because we may have started in mid-July, because it was after my surgery. 6 weeks later, he's dunking. He goes on to be the team captain of his team. And then one of the wrestlers I trained also, like within 2 weeks, he had a match where he lost to the kid. And then 2 weeks later, like he beat up on a kid like 12-4, 12-2. And I remember that was like a moment of truth for me to see, does this stuff work? And I remember the mom was next to me and she was like, "Oh my God, like he's winning. Your training worked." And I was like, "I told you," you know, but little did I know. And what was really happening was some basic things. I got them stronger. I got them more confident, and I got them tougher with the training that they went through. It was super basic. There was nothing fancy. I had nothing fancy. And once I got that taste of delivering results and seeing them succeed, it was like a way of silencing my own demons. Because for me, I had that pain of regret from training the wrong way, yet training very hard, which did not develop the performance I needed for wrestling. And that was the beginning. So it went from my parents' garage, their backyard, I would train at local playgrounds, to the first house we bought, my fiance and I bought. We redid the garage first. And I was training kids out of that garage for a year. Was it longer than a year? No, it was a year because we bought it a year before we got married. We had to gut the whole house, but her uncles were the contractors. They did up the garage. You could see my old YouTube videos. We trained out of the garage, the backyard, and the local elementary school down the street. And even during that time, I learned how to build my website. I was writing for the local newspaper for the sports column on like youth training, and parents were calling me. I left my cell phone and email in the like bio. And people found out about us from the house. There were people traveling up to an hour away to get there. Now, of course, so we got married in '04. I was in training out of my first house in 2003 and training out of my parents' house around '01, '02. So it's been a long time, and it was a very, things were so new back then that if people saw kettlebells, they were calling it kettleballs or cowbells. Like they didn't know what it was, and they thought everything was like magical. Oh, he's got battle ropes. Everything they thought was a secret. And a big, boost for me with knowledge was when I was teaching. Every week on my prep period, I'd get on the phone with Louis Simmons, and we'd speak for like 40 to 45 minutes. And he would tell me about the football players he's training, the wrestlers, the MMA fighters. And I bought my first sled from Louis. I bought one of his pieces of equipment called the grappler, which was 2 landmines put together. And I developed this kind of like little studio gym out of my 2-car garage. But those guys went on to really completely transform. I still speak with some of them. One of them is a coach at a high school now. And, it's like, wow, the time goes fast. And of course, things have changed. I've developed greater knowledge, but the athletes have de-evolved since then. They've gotten like less fit and less capable emotionally and physically. So the business today is much different, especially for people running a business. What's happened is because of all the information that's out there, the sport coaches are just running the weight room, even though they're not really qualified to do it. They don't have the deep knowledge needed to train an incoming freshman, to develop that kid. Kind of everybody's on the same program. So running the business is trickier. It's harder. There's much more intricacies involved compared to my early days when I opened my first warehouse, which was in 2007 is when I got out of the garage.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Man, that's such an awesome story, and there's so many things too that kind of resonated with me. You were talking about like those early days of the internet, right, when there wasn't that much on there. I remember I grew up, I'm a little bit younger than you are, but I remember it was like 98, 99, just like the dial up and seeing what websites were out there. And it was like, the forums were really it, but I was so young, I didn't understand a lot of that stuff at that time. But I just remember picking around, and the first, when I switched my major exercise science, I went to Louis Simmons' website. This was like 2004, 2005, and I downloaded like 450 pages of all his stuff. And just
amazing.
Read it all. Yeah, it was like, the amount that was going on some people's squats, that he improved some people's squats. I'm like, man, that's almost my max. Like, this is incredible how much is on there. So one of the reasons I love talking to you, Zach, reading about your story, how you train, and I just think about this stuff a lot. And you mentioned it, like you put on so much more strength in your garage, like that environment, and you created
Yeah.
it, had ownership over it. Not machine-based movement. And I think that those of us, especially those of us who have all the equipment there for us, and there may not be as much decision-making process, we don't have as much creative means and outputs, and I know you've done some really cool creative things, but I'd like to go into detail about using like alternative training means for athletes. So maybe barbells, but maybe things in a different way, making do with what you have.
Right.
I know you've used like logs or different types of
Yeah.
things. So could you tell me a little bit about the value of that work? Maybe not only from a mental perspective, but also just from a physical, because I mean, just the complementary nature or the impact that type of stuff has to get athletes really strong and fit on its own.
Yeah. So all those odd objects was essentially they came about through a mistake or like by accident. So number one, I didn't have the finances to purchase equipment. And in my early years, if I saw like these guys that had the bigger names, they had expensive squat racks, collegiate squat racks. They were using like the oh, I forget the name of that company. It's the functional trainer. Do you remember the name of that company? It's like a it's basically a cable column where you're doing all the rotational stuff and all these exercises, but the cable column itself was five or $10,000. And I remember talking to my dad, thinking to myself, do I need to take out a bank loan to purchase this piece of equipment? So what I began doing was simply utilizing what was available. And one of the earliest influences to that intensity training was Rocky movies, especially Rocky 2 and 3, with him training at the junkyard, Rocky 4 training out, in Siberia. And then when we bought, or actually, let me back up, out of my parents' house, the backyard had like these two levels, and the level was divided by all these stones. So I'd simply use stones. I started becoming more resourceful. I remember early days World's Strongest Man from the early 80s. There was a channel called, I think, Wide World of Sports on CBS. It was CBS. Those guys were like throwing car tires or doing tug of war on car tires. So I became resourceful and I looked at here's an exercise. It's a clean and press. We could do it with a dumbbell, two dumbbells, a barbell, or a stone. Then I began making equipment, and I had listened to an interview with Josh Henkin talking about the kids on the farms being so strong. So I remember thinking to myself, well, I want to develop farm boy strength. And being in a pretty suburban town that's almost like a city now, I started making stuff. I started, making my own sandbags. I went to the local liquor store, multiple liquor stores to try to get a keg until finally one person I said, I think I said I'm a personal trainer and I'm going to do strongman training. So I want to buy the keg. And the people in the beginning were looking at me like I was going to do something crazy, like this guy's, going to throw a keg off the top of a bridge. So I started implementing those tools, and I still remember the first time I asked one of the athletes to pick up the sandbag off the ground, and he was wrestling with it for what seemed to be several minutes. And he's like, this is so awkward. This is tough. And what he was trying to say to me was, is there a better way? Can I go use the barbell? And I said, that's exactly why we're using it. Because when it's tough, that's when you have to make it happen. That's when you have to be strong and not give up. And I learned that those odd objects got the kids tough. It also added in those early days a very unique element where they felt special. So when we bought the first house, there was an old cherry tree in the back that was dead. So my wife's uncle cut it down. Then they took away the logs, but he left me two logs because I think he knew I was going to use them. So they were about 4 feet in length. And I remember just Zercher carrying it around the backyard, and my back and abs were worked in such a different way. And for people now, it's different. Back then, I was used to training on a Smith machine, leg press. Although I could squat a lot and bench a lot, I did a lot of machines. I wasn't carrying anything or doing any kind of manual labor. So I remember carrying that log, and it just, my buddy would come over, we trained together, and it just became this experiment where I got a wheelbarrow from Home Depot. We'd put weights in it, we'd push it around the backyard, we'd farmer walk the heavy dumbbells, and my street was a little bit on a hill, so going up the hill was brutal. If we were floor pressing, we would have to deadlift it and hand it off to each other. And I just learned that those odd objects build a a mindset or mental toughness, if you will. They develop a more grittier athlete, but they also developed a strength that was a little bit, Marty Gallagher calls it the in between muscles. So a lot of injuries, and I had this conversation over the weekend. Matt Wenning and I did a seminar together, and I said the reason why I'll use these odd objects is because injuries tend to happen when the athlete is in an awkward position and their body is kind of not used to it, so they get scared and it shuts down, or they emotionally get scared and it puts them in a dangerous place. I always tell my son when he's wrestling, I go, you cannot be afraid when you're out there, because then you'll be cautious and you'll be backing up and you'll get injured. You're always better off attacking, or just, not, you don't get scared. So I found that the athletes got tougher by training outdoors, training with, odd objects. I remember having a kid, we were at an elementary school, and the playground basketball courts were very low to the ground. So he would do like squats or clean and press for five pull-ups off the rim, then he'd sprint right up a hill. And it was like this perfect storm of strength and speed and toughness. And if it was multiple guys, they'd get up to the top and then they would wrestle at the top of the hill. And it was just building hammers doing that stuff. Now, I think in the early days, and probably still to this day, people look at it like that's the only way I train. The majority of our training is probably free weights, calisthenics, but we will use odd objects. But what's been unfortunate is I found that people are more susceptible to injury. So whereas I used to have this like 600 plus pound tire that everybody was using, now I stick with like this 350, 400-pound tire, and every time I pull it out, there's another tire next to it, and I leave the big tire there. I'm like, oh, I'm pulling out the little tire. I'm thinking to myself, it's so like, it's almost sad, because the toughness and the strength is not there. And before my first gym moved, there was dust on the 600 plus pound tire. And one of the kids asked the coach, and the coach was like, hey, man, what I heard was that all the high school kids were flipping that 650-pound tire. And like, it was just collecting dust. Nobody was flipping it. And we just have different kids today compared to before. And also, sometimes I wonder if with my greater knowledge, I'm more conservative, because I've seen so many athletes get injured, not from training, but from overuse of sport, because every sport is essentially it's at least 2 seasons now. So my son plays baseball. He's playing baseball right now. It's the fall. Then he's going to play in the spring. Then they got winter training. And it bothers me. And that's why I have been involved in wrestling, to develop strength outside of this one sport. But, there's kids that are 8, 9 years old doing one sport and just focusing on it. And those kids are, I don't want to say they're the worst to train, but they have the most issues with, they just have a lot of issues, from like poor ankle stability. They move quite horrific. Their posture is bad. I mean, they come with like a host of problems that athletes shouldn't have. They almost look like they're not athletes with how beat up their body looks. And just parents cannot grasp, even with all these articles that keep coming out saying multi-sports are best, there's just too much pressure. And I think for the parent who even somewhat cares, they're getting their kid involved more so. So it's a part. These odd objects are part of the program. There's certain times where I use them more often than others. There's times where I take like a week away from free weights and it's just like sandbags, kettlebells, calisthenics. Um, but I found it to be a great blend of mental and physical for the athlete.
Yeah, that's amazing how you've had to change that programming over the years with the changing
Yes.
generations. How long have you been training? What year is this of you training athletes now?
So I started training the guys out of my parents' garage. Um, was that the end of my third year teaching or something like that? It would have been somewhere around 2001, but we could go back to my first coaching job. I worked at a hospital fitness center. The part of it had cardiac rehab, but the gym was open to the public. So the adults would come and then they would start bringing their kids. So I got that job. I was 19, I remember. So it was after my bodybuilding show. It was the fall of 95. So I was training. I remember when parents found out that I was a wrestler, they would bring in their kid who wrestled. And I remember this one kid, his name was Lucas. He was a short, stocky kid, but just looking back now, this would never happen. I taught him how to deadlift, conventional. He picked it up right away. His chest was tall, his back was flat, but I also had him doing things like benching on the universal machine. I had him doing pull ups and dips and dumbbell benching, but he had the deadlifts and the squats in there, which gave him a big edge. I got him very strong, developed muscular endurance, and kids back then were not lifting. They did not know how. So that kid went on and started crushing people, and nobody really understood. Oh wow, he trained with there was no strength coaches back then. He went to the JFK Fitness Center, and some guy Zach helped him out. Nobody really grasped why he made that big jump, and it was because he was a light kid, but like he was he may have been like a 112 or 119 pounder, but he was squatting like close to 225 and he was deadlifting over 225. He was, doing twice his body weight on these basic barbell lifts and doing, 10 plus pull ups, 20 plus dips. That's why he was beating people up. So I started, training athletes and getting into the profession around, '01, '02. But how long have I been training people? As soon as I had training partners in high school, I was always viewed as Zach's the coach. Zach's putting the workouts together. Do what Zach says. And it was because I always had a lot of fire and passion that it's just been my natural thing. Even when I work, Joel, like right now I'm in my office, but a lot of times I feel my most creative when I'm going through a workout or just finished a workout because training is what's just really given me such a it just gives me fire. So you know, I've returned back to teaching in the schools because my goal is to really take my system and get it more into the schools than it is just as a independent facility. But man, I love being in the gym. I remember doing homework in the gym when I was like 15, and I still have that fire. But to me, atmosphere in the gym is crucial. So the gym makes me most creative, man. It's really sometimes it's kind of weird. That's where I get like the most fire. But I still love finding those old gyms, old pieces of equipment. I love the history because I respect the history. I respect how strong people got with that limited equipment, limited knowledge, and basic nutrition. To me, that's like, man, it's just so inspiring. And now there's so much information out there. There's so much great information out there. But what's weird is, who's coming across the great information? The coaches. We're exchanging our great information. We're educating other coaches. The parents and the kids are coming across very generic stuff that they doesn't give them a proper grasp of what they need and what they should be learning from. This is why parents don't think that there's any difference between myself and the local high school football guy running the weight room, when there is a tremendous difference, but they don't know because we always speak our language. So in the industry, I know we're going on a tangent here, or I'm going on a tangent. Sometimes my fear is that in the industry, the great coaches, they've kind of gotten out of the gym business because it's very hard to run a gym, and it's much easier to share your training knowledge than it is to run a business. It's much easier to talk about running a gym than it is to actually be the guy who runs the gym. So we're in that weird place now where parents and athletes are not coming across the right information. Great coaches are leaving the gym business because they're tired of the headaches. And people teaching others how to run a gym oftentimes don't have a gym or have never run a gym. So we're in like a really weird place now in this industry.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, no, I agree. I really resonate with you in the sense that, like, I'm also my same. Like, I'll be working out till the day I die, and the most creative and fired up I ever am is the end of a great workout. And then getting together with another coach who has similar views, it's like we create together. I've been doing a lot of reading on creativity lately, and I think that's a lost, not lost, but like it's so easy just to. And God, even with like smartphones, it's like, or just the ability to look at a phone and not dream or imagine or work on your own
destroys your
process.
creativity. I
Yes.
said this to my kids a lot lately. I said, you keep spending your time on that phone, you will lose your creativity. You're going to be unable to read a book and tell me what you just read. You're going to be unable to create because you're only consuming. And something I read recently, which is very powerful, and I've been implementing it, which has been changing my business, is we're oftentimes thinking of how to grow, how to expand, but it's not so much how, it's who. And the reason why I'm saying that is you said you'll train with somebody or you'll do a project with them, and that's when you get creative. So the Strong Life Experience, I partnered up with a friend of mine who is a very, like, he's just the best guy when it comes to video and having the artistic view of how to like share it out and get the message across. Sometimes I feel I don't even really know how to parlay my message properly. Meaning, he knows how to say, this is what you're trying to teach. And he could put it into a video, like the way a movie producer can. Sometimes I feel like I know if I could get in front of people, I could share it. But before they get in front of me, it's hard to get them to understand what it is I'm sharing. And this weekend, I did the seminar with Matt Wenning, getting back to running a mastermind group. And I've realized that this book, I'm going to show you this book, has really influenced me a lot. It's called Willpower Doesn't Work. And the gist of the book is you could have all the discipline in the world. And there's this big discipline kick with people following Jocko Willink. But here's where it gets deeper. Benjamin Hardy, who wrote the book, said it's your environment that gives you the discipline and puts you in really the hot seat to create and achieve more. Now, people might not be around Jocko, but they're virtually around him because of his podcast and his consistent message through Twitter and Instagram. So they are part of or he becomes part of their environment. Whereas I look at the best bodybuilding gym I trained out of, everybody out of that gym was winning the bodybuilding shows. Like they were winning the Mr. New Jersey. This was this little gym and there was like 6 pro bodybuilders there. It was like, back then there weren't a lot of pro bodybuilders. It was very hard to become pro back then. You had to win like the entire show. You couldn't place top 3 in this weight class. It was the entire show. So me realizing, wow, it's not just what I want to try to achieve, who am I going to do it with? So now I'm partnering with the right people and really doing a strategic, and I'm taking a strategic plan of action to be around the right people where we complement one another and we help propel one another forward. And just since doing that, like my productivity has, I can't even tell you how much, 10, 20x it. I had the seminar in July. I just had a seminar this Saturday. The next seminar is in October, so it's just shy of a month from now. I partnered up with two companies for a new podcast. Plus, I have my own podcast, and I'm not busier. I'm just taking what I already do and partnered with people to move forward. And the strength and conditioning industry, there's a lot of separation. People are creating separation, whereas my early years, I never wanted that. I always wanted to bring people together. And when I got around the wrong people who caused separation and caused like this faction and that faction, I moved away from those people. And you've got to do, as a strength coach, you've got to do a great job of finding people who have that more of an abundance mentality versus oh, it's a secret. And there was a lot of that in my early years, like you couldn't email a coach. You couldn't even find their email back then. You had to pay to be in their private forum. Now you could you could message Charles Poliquin on Facebook. You could reach out to the best of the best through any social network. And the power is, who you're working with. And that's what I've learned is like, okay, that's why I got back to teaching, because it's who am I going to do this with? I'm going to get into a school system, and I'm going to do it with the school, because I know my path is working with this. When I say youth, it's that middle school, high school, and college, but especially middle school and high school. So it's really changed my thinking, and it's just made the results that much more powerful.
Wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the collaboration effect and the mentality of so many people is the industry is a zero-sum game. There's winners and losers. It's like there's always athletes to train.
That's right.
We're living in an age of abundance, and I completely agree with you. I wanted
Very
to
true.
get back a little bit into the some of the work you were doing in terms of where we left off. Actually, well, the reason I asked you how many years you were coaching, I was really wondering what those years were where you were like, wow, I do notice this big downtrend. Was there like any
Okay.
specific year where you're like, or in terms of your athletes getting injured more
Sure.
easily, they weren't ready? Was there like a year, a couple of years where all of a sudden you're like, whoa, or is it just like slowly and steadily over the last
I
5 or so?
still
Or
remember I remember this one conversation I had with a dad, but I can't remember if I owned the warehouse gym or if it was out of my garage. So I was training football players, wrestlers, baseball players, and those guys were also multi-sport athletes. So a football player might also be playing lacrosse. Football player is also playing basketball. Wrestler might play lacrosse or football or track and field. But I remember this one kid, and back then, by the way, my prices were also more expensive. I had a much higher price point compared to today, which is really weird. Like, we're in the Amazon Walmart space where people want things cheaper, even when you're 100 times smarter than you were 15 years ago. But I remember this one kid was a good pitcher, a very good pitcher, and supposedly was already getting scouted. And man, it's bothering me that I don't remember if I had the house or the gym. But the dad, I remember, made a comment about it being too expensive and him being too busy. And oh, I did own the gym because I ran into him when I was leaving a follow-up visit from a meniscus surgery. And as I'm walking out, I see the dad and his son sitting in the waiting room. I don't remember the name, but the kid was he was a baseball player. It was early spring, and I was like, what are you guys doing here? And he tells me that he tore his ulnar radial ligament, and I was like, I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, like this is the first kid I've run into that's about to get the Tommy John surgery. And I was like, man, well, at least he's young and he'll have time to recover and make a comeback. So he was a senior, and the dad goes, he was time for what? Time for soccer, or he said something like that to me. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, he was thinking it's so expensive to train with me, but it's more expensive to lose your sports scholarship and now get a surgery. And we had this conversation this Saturday with the seminar with Matt and I. And what that kid did was he waited to get surgery till after the season, but he did not pitch. He only could hit. And his main thing was he was a pitcher. So he lost his scholarship. I don't remember what happened to him, but he was friends with a lot of those football guys I was training. And the bottom line is that was a beginning message to me, a story to share about why you got to invest in your kids and you can't just play the sports. So in those early years of the garage days, I would tell kids to do, push-ups, pull-ups, squats, lunges. Nobody had collapsing ankles. The thing that some of those kids struggled on was pull-ups. But back then I didn't have the foresight to see exactly who was not eating correctly. I gave kids nutrition guidelines. I didn't check in with them on the regular. But then, then it was like one kid out of a group of 25 struggled to put on muscle, struggled to do pull-ups, struggled to get strong. And it was an issue with nutrition and, lifestyle, essentially, sleep habits and things like that. And then when I opened the gym in 2007, those kids were all tough and strong. A kid would throw up, he'd go and throw up against the fence and he'd walk back in and finish, or he'd throw up and he would train. He wasn't like scared of it, and nor were the parents scared of it. Now you got to remember, those kids were predominantly wrestlers and football players. So football players, that's their dads were like, okay, kids throw up during 2-a-day footballs. Wrestlers throw up. They would throw up after doing like sandbag and prowler work. It like destroyed them. And it wasn't like I was doing anything crazy. An introductory workout was always like this, Joel. I had this system. I would do some movement prep, jogging, skipping, karaoke, hopping on one foot, side shuffling. Then I would take them through like a calisthenics intro, 10 squats, 10 pull aparts, 10 recline row, 10 lunges, and maybe like 10 abs holding yourself up on the dip bar. Do that twice. Then they would do partner. I would do, hold their ankles. They'd walk on their hands, do pull-ups, 4 sets. Then they would do sandbag power clean, 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 4. And then they would do farmer walk and push-ups, and then they would finish with some sleds. Kids would do that whole workout, the whole thing. And then here and there, a kid would come and like be exhausted with the hand walking and the pull-ups, or not even be able to walk on his hands. And then they just couldn't make it through the workout. One kid struggled during a warm-up, I remember. Reason why I remember this is I was next to an auto garage and there was a car parked. And while he was doing lunges, he was like holding onto the car. And it was a summer day. And it may have been, I used to just be there at all hours. So he may have been there at like 12 noon or 1 o'clock. And he was like, he's like on the bench that's outside of the auto garage. He's like, oh God. So I'm like, you all right? Are you okay? Did you eat breakfast today? He's like, no, I was too busy. I was like, well, what do you mean you're too busy? What time did you wake up at? And maybe it was like a 1 o'clock workout. I can't remember, but he woke up at like 12:30, 12 noon. And then I was like, I remember ripping into that kid, and I was crazy the way I would like kick kids out. And I was like, it's because you're out all night and you're too lazy to wake up and have breakfast and you don't want to be here. And I just sent the kid home on his bike. And I would just turn kids away. And it wasn't a free trial, free assessment. It wasn't a free intro. It was a trial. People were going to try out to train at the gym. And I had a 40-member limit. And if we had 40 people, you were put on a waiting list. And my average monthly membership was $275 a month. So at 40 people, I quickly built a 6-figure gym while running it with part-time hours. I was open 3 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 p.m. 3 hours a day. I think Fridays was 5 and 6, Saturday 9 a.m. only. And then by probably like 2010, 2009, on the regular, I started having kids who couldn't squat all the way down, kids who couldn't do a push-up, kids who definitely could not do a pull-up, kids who, just everything became a struggle. It wasn't even the workout was a struggle. Moving during the warm up was a struggle. Kids couldn't skip. I remember a young kid who was like 11 or 12 broke his foot jumping rope with us. He was an AAU basketball player and he felt something. And my knowledge of how to kind of command the room and handle situations like that was very good because as a teacher, when something happens, you're not like shake it off. You're cautious about it in the schools. This way, you don't have something bad happens. You're always better off letting the kid go to the nurse. So he's jumping rope during the warm up, and he's like, I felt something like hurt in my foot. So we just did upper body that day. Granted, this is an 11 or 12-year-old kid. You don't want to just do upper body with that kid, but he did push-ups and recline row, and he did some med ball throwing and a lot of band work and abs off of the dip bar and things like that. But I told his dad. His dad was like, okay, let him just finish this workout and like maybe just sprain something. And I checked in with the dad and I said, look, if it still hurts, I go, there's nothing wrong with just going and getting it checked out. You never know. And that's what you just say as a teacher. You always say, hey, take your kid to the doctor. You never know. They get an x-ray. His foot is broken. And I don't recall if I was in an argument with the father, but I remember telling the father because I had gone through the first IYCA youth certification, the first certification ever. I went through the pilot program. I was with Lee Taft. It was when Brian Grasso was running it. It was like 15 or 20 of us. And, I knew and understood about multi-sports to develop the athlete. This kid had 11 months of AAU basketball since he was 7, I remember. So I explained to the dad, I said, his foot broke because if you think about it, Mr. Smith, he's been playing basketball for 4 years, for 11 months out of the year. He's not playing any other sports. He's sprinting and jumping every day. That equates to probably several thousand jumps a month. Let's say it's, let's say he's, all the sprinting and jumping, we're talking like 40, 50,000 jumps in a year. I mean, it's insane. And he was like, no. He's like, that has nothing to do with it. He broke his foot jumping rope. You guys were negligent. And it's like a kid is jumping rope and broke, a metatarsal. It's insane to me, but it is your body. We had this conversation. Matt Wenning said, staying healthy is a matter of that optimal training. He goes, if you will not back off on your training, your body will force you to back off by getting injured. Things will break. Your car breaks down. If I'm going to drive to your house, Joel, my car is going to break down somewhere out on the West Coast. And I'm going to say, Joel, I broke down in Arizona, whatever. My car is old. You're going to be like, Zach, you broke down in Arizona because you drove all the way cross country. You didn't get your oil change. You didn't pull over. You kept going, you were doing 100 miles an hour. You never went the speed limit. So your car broke down. And that's how the human body is. And now we're dealing with two things. We're dealing with the overuse and we're dealing with a lack of physical readiness, a lack of physical basic preparation. I had high school kids telling me that they were squatting 1 rep max, but they couldn't do a good body weight squat. They could get halfway down. Kids were benching, which I'm okay with benching when you can't really do push-ups. Sometimes I'll have a kid who can't do push-ups, just do the bar for a lot of reps or a lot of light dumbbell work. But these guys were doing 1 rep max. So by the time I think 2010 came around, 3-4 years into running my gym, that's when I started seeing a pretty good decrease in the athleticism and the capability. And now we're 2018. I would definitely say when I opened this location, I opened it this December I signed the lease 6 years ago, but it took me like 2 to 3 months to get it open. Opening this gym in this little beach town, I remember getting very much the wrong kids. I remember a kid was going through his trial and I told him, go ahead and grab a drink. And he went to the table where we have like an area where the kids put their book bags. And I saw him like take his phone and duck down and like text message or something. he was like looking around, like hiding. And I was like, what the F is going on right now? And I walk over, I'm like, are you hiding, texting? I was like, we don't do that. And when his dad came in, I remember I had a conversation with another dad and I said, your son was checking his phone every time he went back. And he's like, just to be clear, he's like, I saw a lot of guys check their phone. We don't let kids check their phone. Nowadays, they come, you see them like press their phone, but I realized that parents got softer, kids got crazy soft, and everybody started getting scared like 4 or 5 years ago in a way of like, he's playing football. Is it bad for him to work out? And moms would say that. And I'd say, your husband probably played football 8 hours a day in the summertime. Your son is going to an hour and a half practice and doing a controlled workout for 30 or 40 minutes here. There's kids in Pennsylvania working on a farm before they go to school and after school. They're going to be fine. But parents are scared. And even my kids are now 12 and 10. Pretty serious tennis, and my son's pretty serious with baseball, but he also wrestles. My daughter will play soccer. She's going to join the basketball team. But I am not afraid of the work that they do. The thing that I'm concerned with is when their sport coach tries to become a strength and conditioning coach and starts having them do incorrect training, incorrect technique, and the same old repetitive warm up that doesn't really attack their weak areas. So that is an issue where, as an independent strength coach, we are now undoing mistakes of sport coaches who pretend to be strength coaches. This is not old Soviet Union where the sport and strength coach was one. They were the same person. They just don't have the knowledge of today, and kids being more messed up with their mobility and stability than ever before. You need to be smarter than ever before. So I'd say 6 years ago, I started seeing quite a dramatic decline. And even back to being a phys ed teacher, the presidential fitness test was a 1 mile race. My buddy said, look, we're not running that 1 mile. Kids can't even do that. He goes, presidential fitness test will now be quarter mile. And even the college kids, one of the kids we train just had to go through basically they had to put him in a coma. He had heat stroke. He's a freshman in college, and they kicked off training, right away. And he had a shoulder surgery, so his training, he wasn't doing a lot of heavy training in the summer. But sport coaches aren't wondering, hey, what did you do? And they're kind of, sport coaches are sometimes doing their own strength and conditioning or conditioning work that the kids may not be ready on, and you're better off just kind of even the college level giving them like a good 3-week intro to build them up and let them accommodate to the stress of school and get their nutrition dialed in versus trying to get after it right away. And I think an athlete may have died in Maryland recently. I mean, there's a lot going on, and my concern, Joel, is we've got more resources than ever before, but even the college kids are weaker and unprepared less than ever before. So that's why as coaches, there's a lot of strength coaches out there giving up and not training athletes anymore. They're just training, women. And it's like, hey man, if your mission is to train athletes, like find a way to make it happen. Find a way, because these kids need it. I mean, there's more information out there. Are these sport coaches doing the wrong things? Are the kids not stepping up and getting a coach to train them up? I mean, it's a weird place. More information than ever before, yet less prepared than ever before. That's my concern.
Yeah, it is an interesting world, right, where we have just an immense knowledge at our fingertips, but some things just haven't seemed to get a whole lot better. So,
Right.
well, hey, man, it was awesome having you on today. I know our time's up today. I wish we could definitely talk longer, but I always love hearing you speak on the topic of S&C. It always gets me fired up, and also probably hopefully I'll get my creative juices flowing in my workout later on today. So I appreciate it, Zach.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it, my man. Talk to you soon, brother.
All All right, that does it for episode 115. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see y'all next week. In the meantime, please don't forget to visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology. Have a good one.